Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a review of a Hanwei Yari. And before I go too far into this Yari, why don't I tell you a little bit about Yari? I'm not going to do a whole lot about historic stuff, but I will make a few notes. In order to explain what a Yari is, I'm going to probably need some props, and I really am short on those since most of what I do is katana related. This is a little bit different, and I don't have the same plethora of nonsense to draw on. But I do have this Yari, which is the one we're going to be reviewing, and what makes it special, probably most easily to note, is you have the blade section here, and then you have the Nikago, or the tang. It's a big, long metal section that is, basically like a big nail that goes into the shaft of what makes up the spear. Now, there's two holes here, much like how a Japanese sword blade is held by the ska, or the handle on the sword. This is held in by two pegs into said shaft, and that's how the spear is secured. It makes this portion of the spear where the tang is inside the spear shaft very durable and a little maybe easier to control, or it changes balance a little bit. Now, I don't have what you would consider a conventional spear, but I do have something that might work out. What I have is this hoe that I use. That sounds weird. What I have is this hoe, though. This is what I use to clear ice off my steps in the winter. It's very, very old, and it's held together, but its assembly is very similar to what a spear is. You have call it the spear section rather than the hoe section, right? This could be a spear of some sort, and then this round bell section goes over the shaft and is pinned inside. Now, how it's pinned, maybe there's something that goes in the center of the shaft as well, or maybe the bell area just covers the top of the shaft, or the cap here, and then maybe it's secured with a pin, maybe it's riveted, maybe there's all sorts of different things, but effectively this part goes over the top of the shaft, and that's what then holds it on. Now, importantly, there are some Yari that are made this way as well. However, it's not the bulk of them. There's a portion of Yari, I don't know how common or uncommon they are, but some of the Yari were made with this type of construction. That's not the type we're going to be reviewing today, and I wouldn't say that it's the ones that Yaris are very famous for. At least it's not what comes to mind when I think a lot of people think of Yari. When most people think of Yari, they think of a Japanese-y style spear. The thing that you need to know is that that's exactly what they are. They're a spear, but they have some Japanesiness to them. Yari were probably more popular than swords in battle. Now, I don't really know the whole history of it, but suffice to say, this kind of modern idea of what we have about a katana is a little bit idolized and not necessarily true. Yari were probably used much more frequently on the battlefield, at least in several points in history. If you want to know more about that, though, you can look it up in terms of historical research. I'm not a good resource for that type of information. But anyway, keep in mind, spears were important even in Japan. It wasn't all katana fighting and stuff. And yes, I know, this is taken from a video game. Also, there are a lot of different kinds of Yari. Yari is a term that means spear, but there's a lot of different types of spears. As I mentioned, there's some with that kind of bell or cap housing that affix to shafts differently than blades with long Nikagos or tangs. But additionally, there's all sorts of different shapes and sizes and all sorts of different things that go on different geometries for the Yari, and a lot of that doesn't necessarily come through in the photos that you're seeing, but suffice to say, there's a very wide variety of different styles that all fall under the umbrella of Yari. So just keep in mind that I'm talking about this one Yari, but the term Yari means a lot of different things. As a side note, Yari make terrible back scratchers. If you're looking for a Yari, the market is pretty small. If you at least compare that market to the katana market, where you have something that you can find the size that you need and the theme that you like and the color that you desire and the geometry that you think is cool, and there's so many different vendors competing for so many different customers, Yaris are not quite the same thing. You basically have these two different Yari from Hanwei. You have an offering from Sword and Armory, which I found says Yari on it. You probably have some other eBay vendors and stuff in the mix as well. And every now and again, Dynasty Forge offers some Yari on their website. I used to own a Dynasty Forge Yari, so I know they've made them in the past, but I didn't see them on their website, at least as of the making of this review. The price gap is also pretty high. Sword and Armory offers something for around or under $100. Hanwei's are $500 or $600 on their website, but you can find them for $360 or $370 on Cult of Athena's website. And then you have the Dynasty Forge piece, which as I recall was around a $1,300 or $1,400 Yari. Much more expensive, but the quality difference was pretty profound as well. There's a very vast difference in quality and pricing, but the options that you have to choose from are also very small. Now, don't let that discourage you. The option for spears in general is much bigger. There's a wide variety available of spears, but if you're looking for something with a specific Japanese influence that falls under the umbrella of Yari, your options frankly are very limited. Now, I should also note that I've owned a few different Yari. This is my third or fourth or fifth Yari. It's really tough for me to keep track. But what I can say is I've owned this Yari in the past. I've owned the other Hanwei rattan wrapped Yari. I've owned a Dynasty Forge Yari, and this is really the first Yari that I've put to good use. The other ones I kept on display and I eventually traded or sold off, but this is the first time that I've had this Yari and thought, hell, why don't I go whack it into stuff in the backyard? We'll get to that part of the review in just a moment, but suffice to say this is really the only time that I've used a Yari, so as I'm comparing my experiences from the past, I can't really compare them to cutting that I've done with Yaris in the past or use. I haven't really trained with Yaris. I do study a martial art that contains a component of Sojutsu, I think it's called, or it's basically the study of how to use a spear, but I'm pretty far away from learning how to do anything with it. So keep in mind that I'm really a novice or completely inexperienced when it comes to Yari. Their use, their application, what you're supposed to do with them. I understand the basic concept of pointy end goes in the other guy, but keep in mind that my experience and knowledge from a practitioner standpoint and from a collector standpoint is very limited. Right now I'm going to read from Hanwei's website and from their description of the Yari and see how it compares to the one that I've actually got. The Yari by Paul Chen was an essential battlefield weapon of the samurai in feudal Japan, and it took great skill to use and maneuver due to its length and size. I don't know that it necessarily takes great skill to maneuver, but probably takes great skill to maneuver well. I suppose any weapon does. This piece is modeled after the Su Yari, or straight spear design. The Yari does seem approximately the right geometry, at least in terms of its overall size and shape. There are many Yari that are much smaller of the same shape, and also several Yari that are much larger. So I don't think it's necessarily out of context from a historical perspective, but I wasn't able to find anything that exactly matched this particular type, size, dimension. The blade is forged from T10 high carbon steel and is triangulated and double-edged with a deep fuller on the flat side of the blade. I don't know that triangulated is something that's used in the context of actually describing the geometry of a blade, but hell, maybe I'm wrong. Just seems weird off the tongue. Because it's triangle shaped and there is a big deep fuller on the flat of the blade. Differential tempering results in a clear hamon on each edge. Very true. The tangs are long to absorb shock of a blow. They are long, and I don't know how well they absorb the shock of a blow, but it is a very long tang. The shaft is finished in a textured black and has a flattened side at the bottom section for blade orientation. This is also very true. The shaft does have a textured black section and then a gloss black section, which gives some contrast to it visually. There is also a flattened portion near the bottom portion of the spear, and it does let you know kind of where the blade is oriented and where the flat of that blade is. The one-piece staff construction reinforces the durability of the spear. Yeah, that is something we will get to later, but I politely disagree. I got this blade secondhand. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but this is a secondhand piece that I'm testing. And the previous owner mentioned that the shaft ring was a bit loose and that there were some minor scuffs, but really that the blade was not used in an overall good condition, shy of a few scuffs on the blade, shy of a few scuffs on the shaft, and the fact that that ring on the shaft was loose. Now, I have no reason to doubt that that is exactly the condition that the owner had shipped it to me in, but what I got was something a little bit different. The saya was broken, and the blade has lots of saya rub on it. There's some blemishes that are pretty substantial. The shaft has some dings on it, obviously the loose ring, but mostly the saya has a lot of rub and the saya is broken. What I mean by saya rub is there's some pretty big blotchy, blemishy spots on the blade itself that kind of deter from the aesthetic, and the saya's got a big crack in it. And the other thing I can say is that in the other Hanwei Yari that I've owned, as well as the Dynasty Forge Yari, every saya that I've ever owned for a Yari is cracked. I can never get one in the mail that is not cracked. Also, all of the saya are quite a bit looser than you would expect, so they all rub on the blade in some particular spot while it's being shipped across the country, and it creates this big ugly smudge on the blade. So something you might want to expect. It depends obviously on how it's packaged, but if you buy a Yari, expect there to be some blemishes. At least that's been my experience. The other thing that I've had in terms of Yari is that the rings have all been loose. Just about every Yari has some sort of ring on the shaft, and all the time it's glued down and kind of stuck on with the lacquer, and it's just not enough to keep it in place. The humidity change, the temperature change, eventually they just loosen up, and if you handle them at all, even delicately, those rings just kind of come loose. You can stick them back in place, you can put some glue on them, but I think realistically they should be on a little bit more secure. This is a weapon intended to be used after all, and if the ring comes off with even the most basic use, that's really not great. This version features a 16 3/4 inch blade. That is also a little bit different. Mine's a little bit longer, but at the same time these are different blades. They are hand forged and they're known to be a little bit different in size, though the difference in size here is somewhat pronounced. At least if you look at the measurements I have, the blade difference is quite a bit longer, at least if you're looking at the portion of the blade I am, or quite a bit shorter if you're measuring it without the kind of goofy base section that meets up with it. Anyway, it depends on where your measuring point is, but I think you're measuring just the edge, and if that's the case, it's quite a bit different than what's advertised. Not to say that I really minded, but I think some people would probably be discouraged by the difference in size. When you're only talking about a 16 3/4 inch blade, I think you're expected to be a little bit closer to the mark and not be off by close to an inch. The weight is also up. The website advertises 3 pounds 11 ounces and mine shows at 3 pounds 5 ounces. Now I'm measuring without the saya, but with the shaft and the blade, and I only get 3 pounds 5 ounces. If I add the saya in, it goes to well above 3 pounds and 11 ounces, so I'm not quite sure where that measurement comes from either. When I started doing the testing, everything seemed in good order. And again, keep in mind I am not an expert with the Yari. I do study martial arts, but I don't really know what I'm doing with a spear. I moved it around to kind of get a feel for it, and just getting a feel for it in just some basic movements, right away problems started to show up. I thought I heard a little rattle, so I struck the shaft to see kind of where it was coming from. And somewhere between taking it off the stand, moving it around, and striking the shaft, one of the mikugi, which is the pins that hold the blade or the nakago in that shaft, fell out. The ground was full of mud from all the testing that I've been doing, so I spent a few minutes looking for it, unsuccessfully, I might add. Anyway, I picked a stick up off the ground and shoved it in the mikugi hole and broke it off, and Bob's your uncle. Off I go to do some testing. I started moving the blade around again, and I noticed that the brass knob at the end was loose. It's like it was screwed in and then just glued in rather than actually being screwed into anything. And this is supposed to be able to be something that you can actually strike an opponent with. If basic handling caused it to come loose, it really has me concerned as to how durable the fittings actually are. As they say, the show must go on, but I do have to admit we're off to a real shit start. The Yari felt good in thrusting though, almost like the targets weren't even there. It's really easy to control and I had no problem hitting the targets despite my aptitude for really crappy aiming. I also had good luck cutting water bottles. The shape made it easy to cut and the edges are really rather sharp. Water bottles didn't give me any kind of grief or resistance. I even hit the stand a few times trying to cut the water bottle in an upward stroke, and the blade held up really well. I didn't notice any edge rolling or any durability concerns that gave me pause. I hit some cucumbers as well, really just for shit, and I have to say that it did a great job. My aim is good enough to at least hit the cucumber. I was happy about that. There's not really anything to gain here from testing other than the fact that it goes through cucumbers. The next thing I did was thrust into a coconut sitting on top of a tatami mat. Now the penetration here actually surprised me. This is a young coconut. It's not one with an egregiously hard shell. It's got some goo that's still soft in the middle, but the shell is still pretty hard. And I was able to, in this dry coconut that I had already eaten all of the goodness out of because they're too expensive to waste, I thrust my spear into the coconut, and it penetrated through the coconut and then was kind of going, the tip was going into the other side. But then I had the bright idea of cutting a tatami mat. The first thrust was actually pretty good. The cut actually moved through the mat pretty easily as well. It cut about halfway through and I just wasn't standing close enough to get the range right. The next cut I tried was an upward diagonal cut and the shaft broke. It fucking broke in a pretty spectacular way. Not just a crack, but it fully just pretty much blew up and then shattered in half, and on the ground it thumped. Now I got my shit out of the way as quick as I realized what was happening, and the only thing that I really suffered in terms of an injury was a little bit of pinch on my hand because my hand was under where it cracked. If you're wondering about where it broke right below where the Nakago ends, and it looks like there's a portion of the shaft that has been hollowed out that's a little deeper than perhaps it needs to be. Really, I don't know how deep the carving is supposed to go to allow the Nakago to sit in it. I don't know if it's supposed to be just perfectly fit or have a couple inches to account for growth and expansion or warping, but nevertheless it shattered pretty much right underneath where the Nakago is. I was able to see the end of the tang of the blade looking into the section where it broke. Again, the show must go on. I started cutting with the blade that was just left over. I picked it up off the ground and started finishing up the tatami mats, and I have to say that it actually cut reasonably well. The geometry is pretty forgiving and it cut better than some katanas that I've done test cutting with. It's a little bit awkward because of the size and because, you don't want to put your hand on the jagged, sharp wooden parts, but other than that, it's a reasonably fun blade to cut with. Now's the part of this where I have to tell you, is it worth it? You saw me explain what the blade is, what Yaris are a little bit, and do some testing. So, is it worth it? Well, that's tough to answer. It's tough to answer despite the nonsense that you saw with the shaft broking. And here's why. The blade is about $370 on Cult of Athena, and I have to think of Yari in a different context than I do katana. If I was swinging a katana around and the ska broke and it was $370, I'd say there's a lot better options out there. But with Yari, there really aren't a lot of options. So the options available to you kind of change the dynamic of whether or not I think it's worth it. So one, there are things I like about the Yari, and why don't I talk a little bit about those first? So the blade. The blade, I think, is the part that I really like. In terms of the geometry, it still has some Hanwei-isms to it in terms of the blade having unevenness along some of the flats of the blade. In the bohea or the fuller area, there's just basically where it should be smooth, flat, glass-like stuff. There's ripples. It's not perfect, but it's also not thousands of dollars. The general geometry, though, is overall really cool. It's not a shape that you see in a lot of spears outside of kind of Japanese-style stuff, maybe some Chinese-style stuff as well. And there's other kind of things that you don't necessarily see on things in the same price category. It's got this nice waisted section with some pretty clean lines on it, frankly. A cool geometry. The Nakago as well is very long and also has some detail to it. The file marks are kind of a Japanese thing that have their own history and artistry behind them. I won't call these artistry-based yusuri, well, the file markings are not really done in a terribly artistic way, but they're a lot neater than what I see on a lot of katana out of China. Additionally, it has a nice signature on the tang here, which is pretty cool. It adds a degree of class, I think, where even just as a decoration, this looks pretty cool. But more than that, if I remounted it, which I think I might do, I might put it in a rattan shaft and redo the Yari. I don't really have a whole lot of options, frankly, at this point, but I think that this would make a very solid Yari. I mean, realistically, I stabbed it into coconuts. I don't see any deformation in the tip. I don't see any issues with rolling or nicks in the edge of the blade. There are some issues in terms of scuffing, but in the testing that I did, I don't really see any additional scratches or any degradation of the condition of the blade from where I got it in the mail. And considering what I did to it, there should be a little bit more, especially that coconut. I expected a little bit from it, and I don't. So in terms of how the blade held up, I'm very impressed in terms of just the overall shape and what it offers in terms of an aesthetic appeal, a geometry, and what it is. I think it's really good. But the question really is this blade worth $370 to you? That should be your real question. And that goes to the part that I don't like. I don't like that the shaft is completely inadequate. I don't think I'm the first person to have that observation. I know I tested it. I wasn't trying to break it. That wasn't my intention in doing this, but it did happen. And you can see from my dopey face that I wasn't terribly surprised. That's really the part that I have to say is not terribly adequate. If you're hoping for straight out of the box, not having to remount it and just being able to do Yari-like stuff, I don't think that really achieves the goal. Obviously, the Makugi fell out. That was not a cool thing. The little brass ball at the bottom fell out. The saya was also cracked. Now, bear in mind that you may not get a cracked saya if you buy one new. This was a secondhand one, but I still have yet to have a Yari without a cracked saya, and that is not a common thing that I run into with katana or other Japanese blade type objects, or really any type of sword. It seems Yari scabbards are the ones that are cursed. Additionally, the fittings and stuff came off. The little brass ball at the bottom was screwed into glue, I guess, and that is more of a build quality issue. Now, I also contacted somebody at Hanwei, or rather CAS Iberia, and asked if there was any options to get a fixed one. They said that if this type of thing happened between the first year of purchase, that they would probably be helping you out in terms of getting a newer product and maybe issue you some sort of warning like don't cut tatami mats with it, it's a spear, smarty pants. But because I got it secondhand, I really don't have any warranty or anything that I can do with it. But I'm not really surprised, and I don't expect Hanwei or CAS Iberia to do anything about it. It's just an important point to note that I did ask about it, and they said if you did the same thing, that you would probably fall under the warranty. It doesn't really count as abuse, but at the same time, cutting tatami mats with it is not the primary purpose of it. Nevertheless, you did see that it actually cut tatami mats if you get away from the shaft being broken. So if I wrap things up, what do I really think about it? Do I like it? Yeah, I mean, frankly, I like it. I think the question just has to be not do you think that this Yari is worth it, but do you think this blade is worth it? If I think about it from the I want to have a Yari, how can I get that done on the less expensive side of things? You could buy a hickory staff from some either martial arts supply or maybe even Home Depot. You may be able to find a rattan furniture store and get a big shaft of rattan. And then you could get this Yari and you might be able to do some of the work yourself and end up with a pretty cool Yari with a more stable shaft for about the same price or a little over and getting your hands dirty. But if you're looking for a Yari straight out of the box that is functional, I really don't think that this is it. It worked fine for thrusting and stabbing and that type of thing, but I don't know that the test that I did really showcases that it's good. Not just from the cutting standpoint. What I'm trying to articulate to you is that if you had somehow moved the blade out of the way, this is supposed to be a battlefield style weapon. The samurai used these in battlefields with all sorts of people around them. If somebody kind of shushed it out of the way or maybe gave the shaft a quick kick, you don't want it to just shatter in half and kind of explode all over the place like mine did. I mean, that's completely inadequate. I came up with an upward stroke, but I really wasn't giving it everything I had. There was a lot more power that I could have delivered to that stroke. It was pretty minor overall. There's a lot of force that goes on because it's obviously at the end of a stick and I'm hitting it with the part that has kind of the most force behind it. But there really wasn't that much in context. That type of thing could happen in sparring. It could happen if you miss your target. It could happen if someone strikes the spear shaft, from an angle, if you miss them. And I just don't think that the shaft was adequate enough. And that's the part that makes me say, if you're looking for something straight out of the box, I really don't think this is it. I don't know what else would be it. I can say that the Dynasty Forge piece that I had felt a lot more durable and did not give me the same type of pause that I had with the Hanwei piece, but I didn't ever do any type of testing in the same fashion, so I don't know if that one would have just splintered and shattered all over the place too. This is good if you're looking for a Yari and you're okay with remounting it. That's about as much as I can say, and for that, I don't think it's necessarily a ripoff because there are not a lot of Yari made. You can find some Yari on eBay that are antiques, but I don't know, sometimes using antique Yari gives people pause in a different way, like you're destroying some part of history, but they're not all that inexpensive on eBay either, and like I said, your options are just minimal. If you can use a spear for your martial arts style or your uses, there may be a whole lot of different spears available to you, but I'm kind of putting that in a separate category. If I want to study something or do something with a Yari and I want a Yari, the options are limited. So that's really kind of where I have to leave things. I can't say yes or no. I don't think for the blade quality that this seems to be a ripoff. It doesn't seem out of line with the other prices that Hanwei charges for a well-made piece of functional weapon art, but at the same time, I think this one is going to leave you with a little bit of work left to do at the end. Now, I hope that was all helpful. I know I rambled on a whole lot, but I feel like this has to be looked at from a couple different angles, and I hope you found that reasonably useful. And cheers, and thanks for watching.